G'day, I'm Charlie Lynn.
Meet Charlie Lynn, a former Army major who served in Vietnam, Singapore and Malaysia during his 21 years of service. He has run ultra-marathons and held survival courses in the harsh Australian outback. Charlie has also led over 60 expeditions along the famous Kokoda Trail, which must be some kind of record. And what he doesn't know about Kokoda isn't worth knowing. Except there is more to the war in New Guinea than just Kokoda.
This is happening less than 300 miles from Australia's coastline, half the distance from Sydney to Melbourne. Men are sweating, suffering, dying in that jungle, so that it cannot happen here.
It all started here with the bombing of Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941. And that created a military tsunami, if you like, that took about 6 months to reach Rabaul. And the Japanese made this their major headquarters in the Pacific. 100,000 Japanese, aircraft carriers, cruisers, Army, Air Force. And this was the launch pad for the attack on Port Moresby and to isolate Australia from the Americans. And so everything that happened from here governed the conduct of the war in New Guinea. And they tried twice, to invade Port Moresby by the Navy. They were defeated in the Battle of Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway. So the only way they get to Moresby was overland over the Owen Stanley Range via that little unknown trail called the Kokoda Trail. And all those troops came here from Rabaul. And the headquarters, of course, their major headquarters, was developed here.
Rabaul, peaceful, idyllic, laid back. It's hard to imagine that 70 years ago, the sleepy volcano town was to become center stage in the theater of war in the Pacific. By 1942, the Japanese had decided to establish their Pacific headquarters in Rabaul, and without much resistance, rolled their military machine into town, sending the local Aussie troops who were hugely outnumbered heading for the hills. It was a wake-up call for Australia. Wake up and realize that for the first time in the young nation's history that an Australian territory had been invaded. Rabaul was to become Japan's base in the Pacific, where they could sweep down and take Port Moresby. And from there, it seemed that the next step would be to isolate Australia from the United States.
This was an outpost for Australia. They put the 22nd Battalion here as part of what they call Lark Force. They had Gull Force on Ambon, they had Sparrow Force in Timor. So there were 3 battalions that were really sacrificed as our forward screen or shield. But of course there was no way that they could withstand the might of a Japanese invasion of a couple of divisions supported by Navy and heavy aircraft. So they really only held Rabaul in the first attack for a couple of hours, and then the word was out it was every man for himself. So they had to make their way back into the jungle, through the jungle, without food, without proper gear, without maps. They were just, and they feared the jungle more than the Japanese.
Rabaul today still has vivid reminders of the occupation by the Japanese imperial forces. At Karavia village is a huge Barge Tunnel, just one of the 100 kilometers of underground fortifications throughout Rabaul, built by prisoners of war and local labor.
Yeah, we're going into the tunnel now to have a look at the 5 barges, or as many as we can see, that have been here since the war. These are incredible artefacts of the Japanese presence here in Rabaul, and an amazing feet. And here's the second barge pulled right up behind it. So we can see the second barge here, and parked right beside him. This is a genuine museum in situ. Quite haunting. So we're in the barge here. It's quite amazing, isn't it? It's a. There's the. Yeah. The glass. Porthole. There certainly wasn't much room to get through here. Up into the bulkhead. Yes, all these barges would have a remarkable story to tell, as do the tunnels. Got to be here to feel it. This is a remarkable relic of the war. I think it's a tribute to the Japanese ingenuity and the extent that they went to disguise and camouflage, hide and protect their war gear. I think it's a tribute to the prisoners of war that built these tunnels by hand.
During World War II, Japanese soldiers used them to carry troops, cargo supplies, and patrol on the sea. In World War II, they used them to collect some of the things where they came into Papua New Guinea they need, like timber, gold, copper, and mineral from the volcano. So when they want them to use them on the sea, they used to put the rail first and go the crane near the beach to winch them on top of the rail out to the sea. After using them, they used to winch them back into this tunnel to hide them away from the American Australian aircraft, could find out them and bomb them. So when the war ended, they left them here and they went back to Japan till now.
The locals are also convinced that there is another tunnel located nearby that was bombed in by Allied airstrikes, and there may be Japanese troops entombed within the tunnel.
Happy noon. Boy, how long have you been working here? How long? Long time? Long time? Hey? Yeah. You gotta be careful it doesn't collapse on top of you. So you're digging down and in. So, hard work. Yeah, you're a strong man. Yeah. So you started from up there? That's where it started? You started from the top up there? So you've been digging all this, all by hand, with shovel? Oh, no wonder you're strong men. Eh? Hard work.
Put some dynamite in there or something.
Yeah. So how long have they been actually digging here, Jackson?
For about a month now.
A month? Right.
Throughout Rabaul is a network of war tunnels, a constant reminder of the day World War II rolled into town. The Japanese forces built tunnels for barges, tunnels for hospitals, tunnels for barracks, storerooms, warehouses. There were even tunnels for submarines.
What is it?
Well, they go on a fair bit, but mainly coconuts and condoms.
The Japanese imperial forces had created an impregnable fortress of Rabaul. The network of tunnels would protect it from air attack, and the harbour could be defended from all sides, like this observation post directly above the submarine base.
Oh, have a look at this. This is amazing. I mean, you've got a total vista of the harbour area from here. Nothing could move without being observed. A vertical drop of about 150 metres, direct onto hard coral. There's no way that infantry or marines could scale these cliffs. So almost, you know, this is almost an impregnable fortress when you look at the complete network and honeycomb throughout the mountains surrounding, overlooking the bay here. Very heavy calibre naval weapons, solidly fortified observation posts, places like this which you would never see. Total camouflage would have made it virtually impossible. It would have required a very, very large force at a very, very high cost in human lives to attack Rabaul. This is obviously one of the coastal defences, probably a line of these, I'd say, right around Rabaul to protect their naval shipping in the harbour. The naval gun here would have been directed from the observation post to our rear, who would look at the fall of shot and direct the gunners to either move so many degrees to the left or the right, or to drop short or to extend their shot. So this is a very, very heavily fortified position. When you look at these positions, you can understand why the American commanders decided the cost of lives to attack Rabaul would have been far too heavy. Let's go and have a look at the observation post. From this observation post, I'm directly to the rear of the large naval gun that's there, and I can from here follow the trajectory of the rounds towards the enemy shipping. And from here I would direct the gunners there to either adjust their fire to pull it back, or to advance it, or to swing it so many degrees to the left or the right to home in on their target. Okay, well, you'd have a gun crew here, and the person in charge of the gun crew would be responsible for the sighting of the gun, either raising it and adjusting the fire according to the instructions he got from the observation post behind. In the action, they come over, all the rounds would be located around here in these purpose-designed indentures. Lift the round out, they're reasonably heavy, bring it over here, slam it into the barrel, slam it shut, and then the commander would then give the command, fire. And these would probably fire about between 1 and 3 rounds a minute. Their reserve stocks would be inside this fortified bunker here with reinforced concrete, and so when you needed additional rounds when you're going out, you'd come in here. This here is to protect these rounds from any incoming fire from the blast. So these are purpose-built storage areas, you can see here. So they'd take their round from here, bring it out. In fact, what you would do, I would say, you would bring it from here and replace the ones that have been taken out from here as the other crew were loading the rounds. So that's how you keep the continuous flow up. Now, I don't know how many positions here, but you'd have to assume that this right around the side of this mountain and the side of the mountain we've come up, these would be located in such a way that they could actually mutually support each other. So if one gun was taken out by either enemy aircraft or by incoming naval fire, that the other guns to the east and the west of these positions would be able to cover that area, because mutually support is one of the principles of defence.
Apart from the network of tunnels in Rabaul, there are also a number of bunkers, including that of Admiral Yamamoto, the head of the Japanese Imperial Forces in the Pacific.
We're about to go into now Admiral Yamamoto's bunker. He was the admiral in charge of the Japanese fleet, and probably the most brilliant admiral in the war. And if there was a most important historical place here in Rabaul, it is this bunker. Bunkers are designed to give protection from air attack, from artillery attack, mortars. You know, they are the secure places, and if you have somebody as valuable as Yamamoto, you want to make sure that he's fully protected. Up to the right? Yep. Wow. Right, we do have obviously maps of the harbour here, and they are, I would say, signify Japanese positions around the harbour. So it could well have been that, you know, these walls were used as master maps of Rabaul.
Well, that's nothing. Look on top.
Yes, this is really interesting, isn't it? That's fascinating. Well, it's interesting because, you know, these figures are in English, but the markings here are in Japanese. And again, it's looks like a map of the harbour and surrounding area of Rabaul. Well, I mean, it's an incredibly significant historical location, and if Papua New Guinea have a register of national assets, then this should be the first item that's on it. Well, this is another major entrance into the bunker system, Yamamoto's bunker, which was obviously the nerve centre of the Japanese headquarters in the war in the Pacific. And you can see this is a very, very fortified position. There are communication trenches that extend out here. These communication trenches would have went to other headquarter buildings, to their sleeping quarters and so forth. And the idea of them is it allows people to move between these areas and their major nerve centre here during bombing raids and so forth, because shrapnel travels horizontally along the ground, and these communications trenches give you protection from that. So it allows movement in and out when the bombs are falling. Well, Admiral Yamamoto was, you know, a brilliant strategist, a brilliant admiral, and he spent 2 tours of duty, one studying at Harvard in the United States, and another tour, I think, with the embassy in the United States. So Yamamoto himself was well aware of the might of America. He was well aware that America was a sleeping giant in this conflict. And Yamamoto himself was against any plans to attack America, because he knew what the position would be. However, when he was given the order that an attack on America would be carried out, he planned it meticulously, and as we saw with the attack on Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto said in an interview in 1940 that if he did attack America, or if Japan did attack Britain, then for the first 6 months of the war, he would win victory after victory after victory. But he then said after that he doesn't know what would happen, because he's never had to handle success in that area. And when you think back, that was quite a profound statement that he made. And it was actually the philosophy of Japan. They knew they couldn't defeat America in a drawn-out war. And as we saw, when they got to the extent of their line of communication right on the doorstep of Port Moresby, that was as far as they were ever going to make it, and that's when the tide of the war turned. Yamamoto himself was killed. The Americans intercepted the Japanese code and decoded it, and they were able to learn of the itinerary, the flight itinerary of Yamamoto, so that they tracked him when he took off in his aircraft, and the aircraft was shot down. And that aircraft lies today here in Papua New Guinea. Yamamoto's assassination by the Americans would have had a profound impact on the morale of the hierarchy of the Japanese military and of the men who admired him greatly here in Rabaul.
Although it was highly fortified, Rabaul became useless for the Japanese as the Allied forces were able to strangle supply to the harbor base. As such, an attempt to recapture Rabaul was not necessary. The Japanese held Rabaul until they surrendered at the end of the war in August 1945. It was then that stories of heroism and the horror of war began to emerge. One story recounts the Coast Watchers, who were a group of brave Australian servicemen and civilians who provided valuable intelligence to command posts via radio transmissions from big and bulky radio equipment that had to be regularly moved into the jungle to avoid capture by the Japanese forces. The Coast Watchers would choose vantage points just like this one to spy on the Japanese.
Yeah, the Australian Coast Watchers are one of the great stories of the war in New Guinea. They were local people who knew the country very well. They knew the people, they spoke the language, and their job was to observe Japanese movements and report back to higher headquarters. So when planes took off from Rabaul, they would radio the movement so that by the time they got to the Northern Beaches area, the forces back there, the American Navy, American Air Force, Australian Air Force and Navy, were ready for them. And so the Japanese knew that they were being observed, and they used to hunt them down. They had a price on their head. And but you know, some of the stories of the Coast Watchers, you know, there are oftentimes they lived in the jungle just metres away from the Japanese. They had to set up radios and operate the radios back there. And I recall one of the famous ones was a fellow by the name of Paul Mason, a little fellow, and he had a price of about $10,000 on his head. He was the Japanese wanted him, and after the war, he was invited out to see the admiral of the American fleet, wanted to meet this Mr. Mason. And he was only a small fellow, and he went out with his wife. And he was in the wardroom, apparently, the aircraft carrier, and waiting for the admiral. And the admiral walked in, he's dressed in white and rows of medals. And he said, "Good morning, Mr. Mason." And Mr. Mason sprung to his feet, poor Mason. And the Admiral said, "Mr. Mason, please be seated." He said, "When I'm in your company, I'll stand."
Today, the old town of Rabaul still carries the legacy of the Second World War. And the Japanese Peace Monument keeps a peaceful watch over the town.
This is obviously a sacred site for the Japanese servicemen who fought here. It was a burial ground where was a war cemetery, and then the bodies were repatriated back to Japan in 1953. This memorial has been established by the Japanese war veterans to commemorate the sacrifice of their servicemen. These places are not memorials to war or victory. They commemorate human sacrifice. And the Japanese, like the Australians, were young men doing what they believed was right for their country. War, at the end of the day, is an extension of politics. It represents a breakdown of the political system, as did happen in the 39-45 war. And hundreds of thousands, millions of young men and women and civilians paid for that political breakdown in Europe and in the Asia and the Pacific. So these monuments, these memorials, and this one here has significance for them. You can see in the wall behind me represents the co-prosperity sphere that was Japan's strategic goal. You can see over there, I would say, two entries behind it, which would represent the bunkers, systems from which they fought from. And the site itself dominates the Rabaul harbour here, where they were stationed. So this is a very, very significant site, and it should be protected, and it should be honoured, and it should be part of the story that young Australians, young Japanese and young Papua New Guineans come to learn about. And in learning about that story, they'll learn about, hopefully, the folly of war.
In Rabaul's more recent history, there have been powers higher than the Japanese imperial forces or the Allied forces conspiring to disturb the peace. A volcanic eruption in 1994 led to the evacuation of Rabaul. Subsequent eruptions have made life difficult as the town emerged from the ashes only to be buried again. But the spirit of Rabaul lives on. You can see it in Matupit village at the foot of the volcano. And you can see it in the markets that are gradually becoming busier as the fertile volcanic soil begins to bear fruit. And there is no better example of survival than the old Rabaul Hotel.
The first thing we did was try to get the water restored. We had a bore. And then the second, that as well as the generator, because we didn't have power. There's no town's power for about a year, and there was no telephones for about a year. So the first thing we did was set up an office at Tokua, and we put a girl there with a telephone, and we radioed in the reservations. We got our water on, our bore water working, and we got our electricity up. So we had guests in. The eruption happened in September, and we had our first guest, which was Open Bay Timber, in December. And well, first of all, we got the top floors done because the bottom floors were all flooded and it was just chaos. But we got our top floors working, and we started making money 3 months after the eruption, and we've kept going. The hotel's the oldest hotel in the islands region, has 40 rooms. It services mostly the port, and Rabaul still is the third largest port in the country. So our business clientele is mostly merchant sailors and the people who are servicing the machinery and the factories around Rabaul. And then we have the backpacker and then the organised tours from the Japanese peace memorials.
And the dining room has got a bit of history.
It's got a lot of history. It's family, it put together mostly by my mother, who's not Chinese, but the previous owner was Chinese, and she went to Hong Kong and she really put a lot of study into it. She wanted to have the emperor and the empress, and she ended up in Taiwan. She said Taiwan at the time was a booming place, and it had a lot more genuine sort of articles, lots of colour, good timbers, and so it's put together by mother. But then we've had so many interesting visitors since then. We've had prime ministers, we've had princes, ambassadors, celebrities, so they've all left their mark as well. We just keep adding on to it.
Away from the Rabaul dust and away from the threat of volcanic eruptions, East New Britain province has established a new capital in Kokopo. The town now has a thriving population of over 20,000 people. Even here, you don't have to look far to see constant reminders of the Second World War, like this old tank by the side of the main road.
Well, here's an old World War II relic sitting on the side of the road beside the roundabout here in Kokopo, which is a constant reminder of the of the battle that was fought here. Yeah, it would have been rusting here for 70 years. It's almost like saying thanks for the memories.
There is also a museum in the center of Kokoda town that houses an amazing array of wartime memorabilia. Before leaving Kokopo, we visited Bitapaka War Cemetery. Established just after the war in 1945 and located near 50 kilometers from Old Rabaul and 20 kilometers from Kokopo, Bitapaka is a peaceful and beautifully maintained final resting place for those Australians that made the ultimate sacrifice in Rabaul.
You know, in Australia, in our short history, all of our war dead up until Vietnam were in overseas graves, and that's represented back home by a cenotaph. And the cenotaph is an empty tomb, which is the Australian symbol for all those who have died for freedom in overseas theatres of war. And in those overseas theatres, since the World War I, World War II, the Office of Australian War Graves have established war cemeteries where the remains of Australian soldiers lie in peace in these beautiful surroundings. And symbolising the sacrifice made by the soldiers that rest here is the cross of sacrifice that is the centrepiece, if you like, or the symbol of each one of our overseas war cemeteries. Common to all, as is the register, and the register has all the names of those who are interred in the cemeteries here. Well, this is the Australian Imperial Force, AIF, that the 2nd 27th Battalion belonged to, and it was obviously a Victorian-based battalion because their numbers start with V, and X means they were from the Australian Imperial Force, and the Australian Imperial Force that were volunteers, comprised volunteers that were volunteered to fight overseas. Yeah, in every overseas country where Australian war graves are located, the Australians have a team that look after the cemetery, but the local people are engaged to do that because the local people here are the custodians of the land. They are the custodians of our soldiers that rest here and a very important part of our history. And as you can see from the war grave here in Rabaul, as I said, if you ever want to feel proud to be Australian, come here, walk around these headstones and read the inscriptions that the families have left behind and absorbed the peaceful surrounds of the area here. And you'll be humbled and you'll be proud and you'll go back a better man or a better woman for the experience.
Rabaul and Kokopo would choose to stay at the Kokopo Beach Bungalow Resort.